Ian Hatton joins me on the podcast today. Ian is the expert on conscious leadership, an international keynote speaker, and also the creator of Lead Like Morpheus and Morpheus Genius. I've had the chance to connect with Ian offline and spend a little bit of time with him talking about his leadership journey and also his approach to conscious leadership, which is why I've asked him to come over and have a chat with me about his journey, but also about his approach to leadership. So, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Rashad, what a privilege. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for ages.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well. Ever since we first talked, just listening to how you operate from a leadership perspective and the great work you're doing with leaders across the board, it's just been phenomenal to just learn from you along the way and then also, set us up for this conversation. Now, a lot of people will be listening and watching this. So I want to start off a little bit with the background and the foundation, just in terms of who you are. You've obviously shared your journey with me, but I'd love you to just maybe set a baseline just in terms of like your background and your role and what is it that you do?
Right. Well, I mean, I can basically divide my career into two parts, a IT part and a leadership development part. So the IT part was where I was in the IT industry and worked for a company that you work for Microsoft. I spent nearly 5 years at Microsoft. I was in product marketing at that point, getting away from the more technical side and more into the actual marketing. And that was where I ended my IT career because of all the growth and everything that I'd learned and all my failures and the things I'd gotten wrong led me to believe that there had to be a better way to lead. And after seeing the way it was done poorly, including myself, I decided that I wanted to switch careers completely. The whole idea of authentic leadership intrigued me. So I already, before I left Microsoft, started a master's degree in organizational leadership because I had such an idea, such a passion for what leadership could be and not what it was.
So much I want to unpack there with you, Ian. Right. Let me start off with the transition first, and then I want to come back. And if I forget, just remind me. But I want to come back to when you said you saw what was bad leadership. Give me some examples of what that was, right? So let's talk about your transition for a second. So you obviously make this big leap and you talked about your master's in organizational leadership, but then you also talked about your passion a little bit there and your desire to kind of command, control, influence, and provide direction and obviously trust conscious leadership as you've labeled it. I'm always curious about the perspective on leadership. Is it something that can be taught academically through your master's in organizational leadership, or is it something that comes from within and kind of like you're born with it almost?
Well, the question I often get asked when I'm working with leaders is, are leaders born or made? And my answer is always yes. Yes, because I've never seen a leader that's not born. But guess what? There is so much work that needs to be done. We are so much work in progress, and in fact, there was something you hinted at there, which I'd like to just tell the story because is academics enough? Is leadership theory enough? And I thought, well, 20 years of corporate experience, many of them in a leadership role or a management role, majority, in fact, plus, of course, now I've got a master's in organizational leadership. I clearly know how this is done.
Right,
Well, we know how those stories end, don't we?
right.
I'd started a consultancy. We did a whole lot of work on leadership, and we had some moderate success. But one of the things that I had not yet faced was the inner journey. And this inner journey is the inner journey of, have I really internalized this? Or is it just a theory? Is it just a nice idea? Something I'm passionate about. I want to go and change the world. Take all my experience, take all my talents, take all my knowledge and go and change the world. And it led me down this path where progressively I was getting more and more frustrated with myself, frustrated with my company, frustrated with what I had established because there was something missing. And I, kind of was blaming others and all this kind of stuff. And then I hit what I call my triple whammy. In 1 year, my wife decided to leave me. I changed location and completely left my spiritual family that I was involved with. And I left my business. I sold my shares to my partner and went out on my own, and effectively ended up in what I call the ICU 6 months of my life, where I felt like a zombie. I was burnt out. I was really, really struggling. But in that process, something awakened inside of me. And that awakening was that actually leadership starts within. Great leadership starts with the journey that we take with ourselves. And by the way, that's the term conscious leadership only emerged about 5 years later. But when it emerged, that was the principle: is that a conscious leader is a leader who's been on the inner journey. And that inner journey is a journey of awakening to leading self. By the way, I'd always avoided the concept because I thought I wasn't very self-disciplined or self-controlled, and therefore I could never be a self-leader because, and then woke up one day and I went, oh, but leadership isn't control. Leadership is influence. So can I self-influence? And that awakened me. And I would wake up every day, look out the window and say, my number one job today is me. Not my only job, but my number one job is me. And immediately realized that my influence had increased. So I would go out and be working with leaders, and suddenly I was hearing successes coming back that I'd never heard before. But my techniques hadn't changed, but I had changed. And that was what then got me. So, no, academics, very useful, but the real issue is great leadership comes from within.
Wow. See, this is why I love talking to you, right? Like you just come across and you come up with you portray these stories, and you also operate with a high level of vulnerability and authenticity as well, with you sharing that story specifically about your personal time and challenges, right? And obviously your ICU period, as you label it. And it takes a lot, right, to have that self-reflection done in order for you to get grounded on what was the transition at what point in time, to determine where you focus and invest on the most, which is yourself and your inner leadership, right? But I'm curious because, a lot of folks, and I think, you and I, we read a lot of books, we watch a lot of talks, and a lot of the time you notice that a lot of the big impact players, a consistent theme, and you're a big impact player, a consistent theme is going through that transition, that ICU period, right? For you to really just get grounded on, hey, I gotta lights on, yeah, right? Like focus on myself, and rock and roll and my growth, and that's the place it's going to start. What about those that want to lead and that are still stuck in that kind of non-ICU mode or non-trigger event mode? They're in the corporate world. They're looking at the academics of leadership. They're looking at what they kind of first see firsthand as leadership. It might be good or bad based on our interpretation, and they haven't really had that trigger moment, How do they get to that? How do they get to the other side of it to really determine what are the areas of prioritization to drive impact?
Right. Brilliant question. So, I mean, not everybody is as hard-headed as I am. I am one of those people who needs to bump my head continuously and eventually realize, hang on, if I stop banging my head on the concrete, maybe I will actually not have so much pain. So, I like to say that I'm the kind of person who needs to make the same mistake a few times before I actually wake up. So not everybody has to go through that, and I've actually had this. There's a guy I've mentored. He now runs an international business himself that he established called Africanology, also in the IT sector, software testing, and his business. He one of the things he reflects is how much he's learned from my lessons, and how many of the times he didn't have to go through the long dark night of the soul to learn the lesson, because he saw me do it and he learned it from me. So I do think there are other ways, and I do think that we can have that awakening. I needed it because I'd avoided it for too long. I had specifically, and somewhat maybe subconsciously, but actually intentionally, been pushing back on this idea that I needed to go on this inner journey. And so, if I'm that kind of person, that sometimes it takes a really dramatic sequence of events. And I mean, the sequence of events is incredible. I decided to leave my business. It was less than 2 months later that my wife left me. And almost immediately that I then disconnected completely from where I'd been so involved in a close community for a long time. And so it really happened in rapid succession, and they weren't directly related. They actually came from different angles. They were not directly related, but that then got me into that place where I did have that experience. But awakenings don't always take that. I use a lot of matrix analogies, and you have Neo sitting at his computer terminal, and next thing this text comes up that says "Wake up, Neo." um, and he doesn't really know what to do, and who is this, and he's struggling with this. He's not quite sure what's going on, and then the text comes up, "Follow the white rabbit," and then these people come and they invite him out, and he says no, and then the girl turns around and there's a white rabbit on her shoulder, and that was enough of an invitation. Some of us just need the invitation, and we can then follow the course and we can take it through. What I would encourage, though, is that those who are just reading books thinking that all of the head knowledge is going to do it, that's not going to make you a conscious leader. A conscious leader is conscious of their bodies, of their emotions, the inner workings, even their gut. They say that the number of neurons in the gut region in a human being is about the same as in a domestic cat. Now, domestic cats are incredibly intelligent. So if we're only ever here and we never even are aware of our guts, I'm not saying, we follow our emotions or something. We're just saying it's a whole package. Consciousness is a whole package. And it takes courage. What I do find is that a lot of leaders lack the courage to go on the inner journey. They'd much rather go on the outer journey. They'd much rather go and say, oh, let me go and see what Harvard Review says. Let me go and look at this and look at that. Because I think the most courageous journey of all is the journey inside. The one that takes the most. To look hard, long and hard in the mirror it requires incredible courage. Many people can do it without having the trauma that I had, but it still requires courage. And what's the trigger for that courage? Some people would be inspired by listening to this and go, hang on, that has been the thing I've been avoiding. Let me go and face it. Or they would go, well, I want to go to the top. I want to be an absolutely brilliant leader. So let me go and face that. Let me go. That is the next frontier of my leadership. But do we need sound thinking, sound discipline, skills, knowledge on leadership? Absolutely. So in no ways am I minimizing the academic or experiences of other great leaders. I'm just saying this is one of the differences in conscious leadership, is being able to look in the mirror.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for that extensive level of clarity there. Yeah, I almost feel like, you said it perfectly there, right? Like not everybody needs a trigger to focus and get grounded on what is the right thing to do from an inner leadership perspective, because growth comes from not being complacent. And so some of us have the luxury of being in leadership roles, but we may have not done a leadership role with focusing on inner growth. We may have just landed in a leadership role because, we've performed really well in our careers when we weren't in like leadership type of roles. And we've obviously done the academic, we've done the studying, and then we've gotten into these positions. But we may have not had the opportunity to focus on that inner growth. We also may have not had the triggering event to go through that. And I keep saying we, like affiliating myself with that, which is not the case. But just to make a point though, but I feel like complacency is such a disease that if you're in a leadership role and you don't exploit that growth to do the inner leadership activation, it becomes, whether there's a trigger or not, doesn't really matter, because it has to come from your ability to want to grow and become better, right? Am I interpreting and saying that fairly?
You've got it exactly right. And I want to just give you a specific example of what is one element of conscious leadership. And I think then it becomes very, very clear. Mm-hmm. So one of the elements of conscious leadership is emotional intelligence. And we've been aware for a long time that this is a key to really being a great leader or a great manager, is to have a level of emotional intelligence. And all of the models have these four components in common. There are ones that add different fifth components and all those, but all of the models, whether it's Goldman or any of them, they all have these four components. And the four components, the very first one is self-awareness. That story of I have a fight with my wife or partner on the way to work, and then next thing I'm taking something out on one of my staff members.
Right, right,
That is the lack of self-awareness that this is not about the staff member. This is actually about where I'm at. And what do I do? What are my skills that I process that with? So you go from self-awareness to self-management, and the self-management is, okay, do I need to go and do a breathing exercise? Do I need to go and do something to process this so that I don't carry this into the office? I mean, the reverse also happens. You have a bad day at work, and you walk in at home and you kick the dog on the way in.
right.
It's that thing of, are we self-aware, and are we aware that the issue that is presenting isn't this one that's in front of us? It's actually something else that we've brought in, and that is our trigger. And then the same happens relationally. So this is that emotional awareness and management of ourselves. But externally, are we picking up the cues in our team? But how do you do that? How do you become aware of others' emotions if you're not even aware of your own? And that awareness of others' emotions and what's happening relationally, how we can then do the community management, the relational, the team management, and dealing with those kinds of issues. But all four of those start with number one, and number one is self-awareness. And they talk about Dr. Martin Newman wrote a beautiful book called Emotional Capitalists, which took the concept of emotional intelligence and applied it to leaders and did a ton of research on that. And they've got incredible research on that. And they show how the impact of a leader dramatically improves when they are emotionally aware and emotionally self-managing, and relationally aware and relationally self-managing. And then I've also done a whole lot of work on the next level above that, which is systems, relational systems, which is going beyond just understanding other people's triggers and stuff, but actually going, what is the system doing? And again, all of that, if you cannot go here, you can't do that. You can't go and academically apply that without having become self-aware of your own humanity, because you're dealing with humans, and you need to be aware of their humanity.
I want to come back to the systems, because that
Mm,
was one of the things that really grabbed my attention from one of our very first conversations we've had, right? Before I do that, you mentioned earlier on, going back to your journey, you
mm,
mentioned that, one of the things that inspired you and kind of really motivated and activated you, in addition to all the personal events that occurred, was your visibility and witnessing to what was not really good leadership.
mm.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what is your interpretation of what is not good leadership.
Well, I'm going to make this personal. I mean, I can point fingers at other people, but let me point fingers at myself. In my career at Microsoft, I've always had, in fact, in my entire career, I always had incredible successes when I was leading people who didn't report to me. So, in other words, one of my weaknesses is positional leadership. One of my strengths is non-positional leadership. And I've run projects where we've mobilized hundreds of people, um, countrywide, and all of that with not a single person on the entire project reporting to me. That sort of inspirational leadership comes very, very naturally to me. What I found is that when I was in a management position where I did have the position, I think I relied on the positional authority too much. And what would happen is my own stuff started to spill over. So I did, and this was at Microsoft. We had these wonderful tools, and we did. I became group product marketing manager, Microsoft South Africa, and I just had two people initially reporting to me, and we did the trust survey, part of a 360, and I scored 100% on my trust. Both my people rated me 5 out of 5 or whatever it was on trust. Okay. Then the team expanded, and I inherited some people who were struggling a little bit, or I'd heard were struggling. In some cases, I'm not even sure they were struggling, but I had heard these stories, and I'd inherited, things. And I brought somebody brand new in from a completely different team. And I was convinced I'd chosen the right person, but very opinionated, very dynamic, and we started to bump heads. And uh, there was also, I made a mistake, big mistake, and this is a common mistake, that I was now leading the team, but I'd appointed somebody to head up what was now going to be the biggest product launch that year, which, by the way, was Windows XP a long time ago. Um, and But she was brand new, so I took over the running of that project, and I was doing instead of leading. And we see this all the time. You know, you see your best salesperson becomes your sales manager, and they're still trying to sell, they're not trying to lead, and this kind of thing. So there's so much of this where we often end up in our comfort zone instead of venturing out. But I would say my biggest mistakes there were doing instead of leading, um, emotionally unintelligent. I was very much the problem is here. You are the problem. You are wrong. I am right. This kind of finger pointing thing, where in hindsight, I realize a lot of those emotions was my own insecurity or my own lack of emotional intelligence. And so that really became quite a theme in what happened. And what happened was, so a year after my initial 100% trust score, we redid the 360 and I got 50% trust score. Now, I consider myself a person of integrity. I consider myself a person who has really good, strong values. But what had also happened in that process is I had a lot of pressure from my manager to lead the way he was instead of to lead the way I was. And that also carried through because he was an exceptionally authoritarian leader. And so I was trying to copy his style, which made everybody feel that I was being inauthentic. You see the authentic leadership thing coming through. And that resulted in they felt they couldn't trust me anymore because people sense authenticity. They really do sense authenticity. And so I was being inauthentic as well. So there's three major things I got wrong. I was being inauthentic. I was doing more than leading, or in some cases, and in other areas, I was not self-aware of what the issues really were in my own struggle. And that was probably one of the things that triggered me to authentic leadership is the thing I'm really looking for. Because when I am who I really am, yes, add the knowledge and skill, but when I am authentic and true to myself and my values, then I am trusted. And so trust broke down with that. But I saw many other things. I mean, yeah, I must be careful about what exactly I say here. But I saw, for example, where people who were officially representing, let's help Microsoft build more trust in the market, were telling me how they're lying to their spouse. And I'm going, yeah, something's not tallying here. Something's not authentic here. So yeah, I can give lots and lots of those examples. And I bet you've got 100 stories too.
I'll tell you though, Windows XP will do that to you, by the way. Just kidding. I love your honesty. I really do. You know, I love how open you are about a lot of these experiences, but also still protected at the same time by exposing any individuals. You know, for me, one of the things that's so attractive about you, respectfully, is that you always start with a lot of your conversations, your answers, and your examples with, "I. This is what I could have done differently. This is the situation I've been in." It's a very powerful thing, Ian. And I think, you know, it speaks to the authenticity piece that you talk about, because when I hear you, I just like gravitate to what you're saying so much because of how authentic you are with accountability in the story and in the reference you make. Now, I want to talk about systems because
Yes.
you have
Yes.
some incredibly powerful systems and tools and processes that you enable leaders with to be successful. I wish I met you when I was starting my leadership journey. I really do, because the stuff you've enlightened me to just in the last few weeks has just been like eye-opening, just phenomenal stuff, right? And I mean, I look at my leadership journey when I started off as well. If I knew you and had what you were offering back then, it would have been it would have been an exciting outcome for sure. But let's start off with that exciting part. Tell me a little bit about your system. So a leader comes to you tomorrow that's starting off in their journey. See, just to keep it more specific, starting off in their leadership journey, they're now taking over responsibility of other individuals around and as subordination as well. How do you help them? tell me about the systems you use.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess there's two main categories of the products and the systems that are associated with them. So the first one is where the leader is looking to go on this inner journey specifically, and I have all sorts of processes that I can take them through on that. So we have a process which I call awakening, where we take them through. A little bit like Neo. He was called, he was built, and then he was released. And how do I do that to you? How do I help you to do that? But also the on the inner journey, the changing of mindsets, because mindsets is probably what holds us back the most. So how do we do with that? And I've got a process for that and a system for doing that. I call that the Morpheus method, and it is the process of going from connection to stimulating new ideas and new perspectives to to then challenging those mindsets and seeing how we can shift those mindsets. And it's a whole process of mindset reprogramming. And then I've got another one called Impact, which is all about the real long-term and legacy impact of leadership, where we're doing the kind of work where you're becoming more conscious, more emotionally intelligent, more mindful, that kind of thing, so that you can be tenacious enough to see yourself through, because there's going to be serious difficulties. If you're going to leave a legacy, you're going to face some serious difficulties, through to what I call the triumphant bit, the last bit, which is really about the success through others. I heard a beautiful story the other day of somebody who was asked, what is your 5-year vision? What's your 5-year plan of what you want to achieve? And the guy was like, I don't know what you mean. I have a 500-year plan. And they said, what do you mean by a 500-year plan? He said, well, even after my name is no longer remembered, my family name is gone, I would still like there to be an impact from what I did. And and we have such short-termism, and this idea of consciousness is creating the kind of leadership that has the tenacity to leave a legacy through the impact that it has. So that, and then of course I've got a model for what is the community that you need to be in for this to all work. Who do you need? Why do you need them? How are you going to build that together? And so those are the sort of 4 main components. I then use the same 4 components in the Lead Like Morpheus. In the Lead Like Morpheus, what we do there is we're now talking about rubber hits the road skills. So how do you get each of the genius going for each of your team members? The call, build, release. How do you, because the ultimate goal for me of leadership is release. That and a lot of people think the ultimate goal of leadership is control, and I'm saying no. It's like, as a parent is a leadership role. The ultimate goal of parenting is release. In fact, I've got a friend who says you don't raise children, you raise adults. And I love that concept, because you want to equip your children well enough that they can independently function and become completely self-reliant in their own communities and connections. So not self-reliant as in isolated, but self-reliant as in they have learned what they could from you to take into the world and to make their own success of their lives. And it's the same with our people. As we are leading them, as we are raising them, we want to be able to release. And then that mindset change piece, the Morpheus method I spoke of, how do you apply it to your people? How do you help them to overcome their limiting beliefs and their mindset issues? And you do that by great listening, great stimulating questions and challenging and all that kind of thing. And so it goes, everything that I've just said in the systems, the same systems apply, but we now have skills for each of those. How do you use them as a leader in every one of those areas? And those are the inner journey and the outer journey, but it's the same model, because basically the outer journey is you taking that inner journey and applying it to your people and facilitating them becoming those people of influence, those people of growth, those people. There's a beautiful quote towards the end of the third Matrix movie where they're kind of going, well, we lost. We Zion is doomed. We've got these sentinels and everything are coming to attack us. And Morpheus turns and says, I don't know where he is. I don't really know what he's doing, but I do know this: as long as there's a breath left in his body, he's fighting to help us in some or other way. And that is release. What Neo was doing at that stage was not what Morpheus told him. It's what Morpheus had prepared him for. And he took that decision to go and do that. And that to me is the kind of raising up of people that I think is real conscious leadership.
I love that. Ian, do you consider yourself a coach?
I consider myself more of a mentor than a coach. I do use coaching skills though in my mentoring. So I'm very, very trained as a coach, ICF trained, and I've done systems, specifically systems coach. I've done a whole series, a year program on organizational and relational systems coaching, where we're looking at what is the system that people find themselves in and how do you coach that. So I've done one-on-one and that. A lot of Gallup strengths coaching as well. But I use those skills in a mentoring capacity because for me, the impartation is quite important. And so I don't consider myself a typical executive coach or life coach, more of a mentor to leaders.
So when we talk about coaching and mentorship, um, there seems to be a variety of interpretations around how to activate successful coaching and execute successful mentorship. And so sometimes there's some interpretation that gravitate more towards, well, let me ask you the questions to unlock the answers within you, or let me give you the tools to go and leverage and kind of run leadership and impact leadership that way. Which would you say is the approach you lean more towards in terms of how you activate the people you work with?
Oh, you're going to be so disappointed in my answer. It's right down the middle. It is so right down the middle because for me, I if I create dependence on me, then I'm in trouble because I number one, I want to launch. I want people to fly. I want like Neo to be able to fly like Superman. I want that's what I'm looking for. And so for me, the more coaching approach, which was the first one you mentioned, where I ask really good questions and people come to their own decisions. And one of my favorite things is when somebody says to me, I've just had this brilliant idea. I'm going to go and do this and this and this. And I'm kind of going, that's exactly what I told you 2 weeks ago. But they've now discovered it for themselves because what people discover for themselves, they are 10 times more likely to implement than what I tell them. And so for me, those coaching skills are absolutely essential. That one of the best ways I can empower people is for them to find the answers inside of them. And it's one of my favorite sayings that when I'm working with people is the answers you seek are inside of you. But what I very often find is that they are missing perspectives. They're missing insights on a particular skill or a particular scenario. And I have those insights. And so I don't want to hold back and say, well, figure it out yourself. Um, and I'll sometimes do it in the form of a good question to bring that alternate perspective. But sometimes there's a model or there's a system. And I say, how about this? Go and have a look at this. Does this fit? You know, and so to me, I can't not impart what I've got. But if I make them dependent on me in the process, I have not been a conscious
Fail.
leader. I
Yeah.
I want to help them to become independent.
Yeah, because you're kind of modeling for them as well how to also not be dependent on the ones that they serve too, right? It's essentially activating good leadership there as well. You've obviously had a lot of experience with a lot of leaders that you work with on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
Is there, and you obviously deal with a lot of challenges. I'm sure there's a lot of leaders that come to you and they're like, hey, I got this conundrum, I got this complexity, I need to unravel it, and I need some guidance here, I need some coaching here, and I need you to help me get through this. Has there ever been a situation where leaders come to you with a challenge and you've been unable to solve it or help solve it?
Yes, certainly. I mean, yes, I've had some wonderful successes, and there have been places where I can say, well, okay, I think the problem is here or the problem is there, but ultimately, the two biggest areas where I've not been able to help is where the scenario is so far removed from my reference area. And I'll give you a specific example. A dean of academics, and I'm not an academic person, and my background was always in industry, IT, and I've done a lot of work since leaving IT in banking and in mining and retail and manufacturing and these kind of places. And academics is not an environment I understand that well, and so I just simply did not have the understanding, the contextual understanding, to be able to provide as much as I could. But yet there were some things I could help them with. But the biggest area where I have failed to help people is people who do not want to look in the mirror. And so this whole area where In fact, I reached a point where I would actually test people up front with an interview. In fact, you've been through the interview. Um, test people up front with an interview to figure out whether they really are teachable and willing to go there. And I used to have people approach me regularly for mentoring, and I've had some wonderful successes. But there was one guy who approached me in one particular case, and he was just so keen, and he was telling everybody, oh, Ian's now my mentor, and all of this kind of stuff. But everything we ever discussed, he didn't do anything with. And what I discovered was that he couldn't look here. He could not go here. And by the way, I'd be very surprised if he's still in that place. I'm sure by now, because this was more than 15 years ago, by now he probably has had that wake up call, and hopefully somebody's been able to help him. But yeah, the sort of, I like to say I need to work with someone who's teachable. Um, and my biggest lack of progress I've ever had with working with the leader has been that, where it felt like they were more wanting to say, "Oh, I'm mentored by Ian," than willing to go on the inner journey. Because I'm quite confrontational. I mean, I'm very, very loving. I do it in a very loving way. I connect, I stimulate alternate ideas, but then I'll put it in there. I mean, I think I told you the story of Mandla. Mandla was one of the first that ever approached me, and and he was really concerned, very cultural thing, South African cultural thing, where he was not being given access to a child that he'd fathered, and he felt his rights were violated. And I went, "That's okay, that's wonderful, but can I provide you an alternate perspective here?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, please." And I said, "Do we have rights where we don't take up responsibility?" He was like, "What do I mean?" And I said, "Well, what have you provided for this child?" "No, no, no, but he's a student. He doesn't have any money." I said, "Well, if you're not providing, do you really have the right?" And I think it was in about 3 or 4 weeks, he found a way to get a blanket to the child. It was starting to get towards the winter, and and then he was given full access, and everything started to flow from there. And he had and his that son of his graduated high school last year, and and has a fabulous relationship with his father, as has built from there. And so yeah, I really do connect. I think I love people. I think I'm very accepting of their perspective, but then present an alternative. But he was open to the challenge, and that's one of the characteristics I loved about working with him, and still do. Is that being open to the challenge.
I love that story. We talked about that before. I love how you translate from entitlement to accountability. It's
Mhm.
the big thing that I get from you, and you tell me some of these stories sometimes. And I remember our very first conversation. You were asking me a lot of questions just to get some insights on me as well, just to determine, if I had that accountable gene, if you will. You didn't label it that way. I'm labeling it that way, to determine if I had that self-reflection and accountable gene to come and journey with you together, right? Which I loved about you as well, because it told me that you were investing into something that you knew was going to be successful versus investing in something for the sake of investing into it, right? And I think that's a vital part of impact. That's a vital part of success, versus just the branding around, hey, Ian and Rishan,
Yeah, totally, totally.
tagging
But
posts, whatever. Yeah.
yeah. But that accountability word is a fascinating word, because some leaders use it as a weapon. Who's accountable? What they really mean is who's to blame. And I would love leaders to take it as meaning ownership, a synonym for ownership. Who's owning this? Who can I support who's owning this problem that we're dealing with? And it's a whole different mindset. And so for me, accountability, it becomes blame. I mean, Mandla approached me blaming the parents of the mother of the child, and blaming the culture, and blaming, and we kind of going, well, okay, let's look at ownership here. And when we go and look at ownership here, then suddenly we know what to do, at which he did, and everything changed.
Yes, you don't tell people what they want to hear, but rather activate them on what they need to do to change, right? And there's so much of power in that. In addition to that consistent theme that you obviously assess for, just in terms of, hey, wanting to work with yourself, what are some of the other consistent themes you see from leaders that are successful on the journey with you?
So one of them that I think so much struggle, and especially in our culture, I'm not sure if it's the same in the United States, but here in Africa, there is a very, I don't know if
I'm
it comes
South
from a
African too,
religious
right? Just
perspective.
remember that.
Yes, of course. No, of course. But I don't know if it's from a religious perspective, what it is, but there's an influence in our culture. I certainly got it from my parents, which was not, I think, that religious, but it was cultural. And that is, don't think too much of yourself. Don't, the sort of accusation, look at that person, they think too much of themselves and all this kind of thing. And that mindset of not making themselves their number one job. And that was a big, big thing for me because I always felt I'm not really allowed to love myself. And what I realized is, what in fact is love. Love is care. Love is nurture. And by me going, actually, I need to make myself my number one job. Uh, what happens is, what gets nurtured in me is an energy, a love, whatever you want to call it, that I can then take to other people. And how do you give something to others that you haven't nurtured in yourself? And so this other theme that comes up all the time. In fact, we had little posters made we had all of our people on our 1 year program away for a retreat, and we made little posters which they all took home, framed posters, which said, "I am my number one job today." And it's this thing, and they were all got a unique one. Each one got a unique picture, but with the same text on it. And a lot of them have put them up in their offices right in front, just above their cameras on their computers, and are kind of going with that reminder that if they want to make an impact on the world, they have to be nurturing that impact inside of them. They have to be nurturing what they need. The emotional self care that they want to take to others, they need to nurture it here. The clarity of vision, they need to nurture it here and take it. That whole journey of leading others starts with leading self. And so that's been a consistent theme that's come up over and over and over again. And just this week I was coaching two of my people, and the theme came up again, that they realized that what they were looking for again was kind of out there, but the real answer was here. And so that is a very consistent theme.
Yeah, that's a big one, that one day. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Like I agree with you, like just in terms of culturally, and I know it is a bit generalizing to an extent, but I agree with you, right? Like we kind of have this thing in South Africa where humility trumps everything. It's kind of like how we operate almost,
Yeah,
and sometimes we do that by getting submarined along the way uh,
exactly.
through other areas of success and acceleration. What do you say to the leader that wants to be liked and works so hard on being liked that sacrifices results at the same time?
Yeah, we call that leader is a leader that's in survivor mode. They're coping that at best, and the reality is that I mean, I used to be a pleaser. That was part of my makeup. I wanted everybody to like me,
Right.
and eventually I realized that number one, the more I suppress the direct side of my nature, because I have a very direct side as well, the more it comes out all skew and wrong, which was what was happening when I was leading that team at Microsoft. That went wrong. Was I wasn't I was trying to be nice and trying to be liked, and the result was I wasn't liked. But I'll give you another example. I was working with a big team, a big consulting firm. They had 500 people on a particular site, particular big client, technical people that they had on that client, and and there was a manager in the team. We did a whole lot of work about leadership development across all of the managers and who was ready to be promoted to the very senior level, because the person responsible overall was looking to step aside and wanted to see who they could promote. And one that came out was exceptionally popular amongst his team. His team loved him. Okay, had the worst reputation amongst the other managers. And when we pried into it, this was somebody who spent his whole life, relational, highly relationally wired, built strong relationship with his team members, all this kind of thing. And everybody else is kind of going, "Can you deliver something?"
Right.
You know.
Right.
And so to me, it's not either or; it's both and. And if you look at it, those who are very task oriented as leaders, and those who are very people oriented as leaders, neither of those will ever outperform someone who gets that right with both. Someone who gets that combination right of uh, they're very caring and nurturing about their people and their growth and understanding all the diverse personalities and the diverse wiring of each of their people and all this kind of stuff. But simultaneously, they're doing that to connect it with a task, because there is nothing ultimately as demotivating as having a happy work environment, but you're not doing anything. We know we want to have a work ethic. We know we want to produce stuff. We know there is a deep, deep seated thing inside of us that wants to get stuff done. And so we want to be an environment that is a great team where I feel like I can leverage each other's strengths and genius and all this kind of stuff. But we've got a purpose. We're here for a reason. I've got an employment contract, and I've got to deliver on that employment contract. Otherwise, I don't deserve my pay. Our team has a purpose, and we've got a vision, and and now we're going to put ourselves a stretch target, and we energized about helping each other. That's the kind of environment I want to create, not one where we're just beating people up with the target only, or where we're making the country club. Neither of those to me are effective leadership, and that really satisfy our inner needs. We have an inner psychological, emotional need to do stuff, to make a difference,
I love
not just to sit and have fun and tea all day.
that. I'll hang out at the country club. What a great place to leave it, Ian. Like, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the conversation, just like every other one we have. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for accepting to do a little bit of recording action here and publicize it a little bit. I'm sure that people that are listening and watching will find it very, very valuable. And so appreciate you taking the time to do this, Ian.
My pleasure, and I love being interviewed. You probably noticed my energy level, so this is fantastic, and especially because I feel that there is so much we have in common around this conscious leadership topic.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, my friend.